Hi, everybody. This is Dan and Chris back with our next episode of A Father's Love Healing Through Heartache. Chris and I, as you know, we're just trying to move forward from losing our sons. Chris lost his 7-year-old Mason a couple years ago, and I lost my 9-year-old son Jameson 3 years ago. And for those of you who have followed us this season, you may recognize somebody on this screen. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome back Dennis Jordan. And this time, we're even more thrilled to welcome his wife, Debbie Jordan, with us. If you've been listening, Dennis's story is probably the one that Chris and I have gotten the most feedback on. Chris and Debbie are 37 years into their journey of the grief of losing their 6-year-old son, Ryan. And the main thing that they've provided for Chris, for me, and for many of our listeners is the hope that for all of us who are new on this journey, there is hope that it will get better. And you've heard Chris and I talk many times. Dennis is the one in his earlier episode that really emphasized the importance of taking one step at a time on this journey. So we're just thrilled. Chris, good evening, my friend.
Good evening. How are you? Good to see you. Glad to be back. For those guys that are listening, it actually feels like we haven't done an episode in a while because Dan and I pre-recorded a bunch of episodes, so we haven't actually done this in it feels like forever, Dan, to be honest with you. So I'm glad to be back with you, man, and doing another one.
Good to see you. So we're going to jump right in because there is so much in tonight's episode that we want to talk about. And we've actually changed our plan for the episode. We've made an addition because Dennis and Debbie had a very special experience today. And it just wouldn't be right if we didn't let them talk about what happened today. So Debbie, Dennis, welcome. Thank you for being here. And if you would please tell us about your day.
Tell you about our day. This day was extremely very special. We were actually in the Virginia mountains, the Blue Ridge area right now, and when Ryan was like 2 months before dying, he was terminal. We'd already been told that there was nothing to be done. But Ryan loved to go to the mountains, to the Blue Ridge, where his grandparents lived, and he was determined that we would hike Humpback Rock, which is a mountain in Virginia, and it's quite intensive with a lot of uphill hiking. But Ryan said, I want to do this, and I want you to know that Ryan, 37 years ago, 2 months before his death, climbed that mountain, and he climbed that mountain. Nobody carried him. Nobody had to encourage him. He did it. He was determined to do it, and he did it. And it went to the top, got to look at the great scenery, and just we had a blast. I mean, it was really very special. And so we decided on this vacation that we were going to pay a tribute to Ryan, and we were going to once again hike this Humpback Rock area for Ryan. And needless to say, we're 37 years in the past. So, I mean, we are much older at 37 years than we were 37 years ago. But we're glad to know that we're at least in decent shape because we made it to the top. We got there. And what was really interesting is our son, who happened to be 9 when Ryan was terminal, his name was Chad. Chad told me he knew we were going to do this. And he said, Dad, make sure you take a box of nerds. And the box of nerds has a lot of significance.
It had to be grape and strawberry.
It had to be grape and strawberry nerds. And I found them at 7-Eleven yesterday. And so we took a box of strawberry and grape nerds with us this morning. And we walked the mountain, and it was in honor of Chad because Chad loved the grape nerds, and Ryan loved strawberry nerds, and they shared this experience of the nerds while we were walking and hiking during that time. So just a lot of really like deep stuff. Certainly some tears. Certainly bittersweet. At the same time, just a great tribute to Ryan, to say what a man, a kid that was so full of tenacity, that he perseverance. He would not give up. And so for us as parents, for me particularly, it says to me that when grief gets very rough, when you feel like you can't go on, you feel like you're going to lose it, we just remember Ryan being tenacious and being never throwing in the towel. So, and as I commented to someone, not only in looking at him and what he did was, when you feel like you need to give up, just keep hiking. Just keep hiking. Whatever you do, don't throw in the towel, even though sometimes you feel like that's what's going to happen. And you hike and you keep going, because as Ryan would tell us, the view is something to behold. And I know for Ryan, he loved the view. We love the view. And for us, it's very special for us, particularly with Faith, that we know our son is great. He's fine. His views are wonderful. And we're just rejoicing. It was just a fun day. And we are just glad we did it. And very, very thankful we did it. And going to be sore and a little bit tired, but hey, it was well worth it. Yeah, we certainly enjoyed it. So that's how our day was spent.
Oh, that sounds amazing. What a tribute. I love how you said that. It was a tribute for Ryan. I think a lot of times, and Dan and I are still really early in this process, but those tributes and planning those tributes, they can really make a big difference to a person's psyche in the long run. And so that's something I just took out of the story right now is, making sure you plan those tributes. You think about those good times and you pay that tribute and you remember that good time at that moment. It probably hurt. And I'm assuming it's going to hurt when I do it and when Dan does it and when those are listening. If you plan a tribute, you do it. But I suspect that it's almost a good hurt. Like it feels good at the same time as well. So
it feels great. And to me, you just know how much you love your kid, how grateful you are for that kid, because it's like parts of me today, the tears were just flowing. And we started thinking about this a few days ago. So it's okay. When the tears flow, let the tears flow. It's nothing wrong with tears. Tears are extremely therapeutic. Sometimes I feel like the more tears, the better, because even though, and to me, it speaks to each one of us. If your child has been dead for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 40 years, 30 years, it doesn't matter. That child is still a part of us, and it's always going to be a part of us. And so you just press on. And fortunately, it's not as painful at 37 years as it is at 1 month, a year, 2 years, 3 years. It does soften, and I'm very thankful that it does soften. But does it ever go away? Absolutely not. If you think it's going to ever go away, you're probably thinking not correctly, because there's going to always be something there that says, that's my son, that's my child, and it's always a part of us. As long as we have breath, as long as we live.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know your Facebook page, Dennis. Again, it's just one of the many ways that I get so much hope from you and Debbie, because it's obvious that you still hurt. And like you just said, we will forever hurt because we love our sons and they're not here with us. But the things you post daily are just so inspirational, because again, the hope that we can see your pain, that it will still be there. There's no fake storytelling, fake emotions coming from you to try to just make it seem like you're okay. But it's a real remembrance of Ryan. It's a wonderful tribute, I think, daily of what you post. But we could tell that you're real and raw, and yeah, it does still hurt, but you've lived to learn with it and learn to live with it in a way that the pain isn't consuming you as often.
Yeah, and we're grateful that it doesn't consume us. I mean, you could not live with that degree of pain and grief all your life. If you did, there's so many wonderful things about still living, and other children, grandchildren. I mean, fun together. So somehow that begins to balance itself out. But there will always be that, like I posted something recently that says, if I talked about my child while he is a living, why would I not talk about my child when he's in heaven? I mean, so people that think, well, you don't mention the name, don't bring it up, don't try to talk about it. That's not correct. I'm going to talk about Ryan as long as I have breath in my body because he's still my kid. But he just happens to be in heaven. Well, no better place for him. I mean, he's got made. I mean, we're the ones that are having some struggles here, but our children that are with Jesus, there's no better life. So I think that we just have to recognize that life does go on. We have other things that other events. So you just grief is painful, but also life is still good. Life is still refreshing. Life is still enjoyable.
In some of our time today, it was just the times of gratitude that we were just so thankful that Ryan lived. We're so thankful that we got to be his dad and mom, that we were thankful. And it was just an act of gratitude of just being thankful that though he's not here with us now, he did live. And I think grieving parents need to recognize that, and you will, that it's okay to recognize, it's okay to say my child lived, and I'm going to talk about my child and have memories of my child because they did live. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but some people just say, don't talk about them, it'll make them sad. But no, that's the best thing you could ever do for a grieving parent is say my child's name. And let me tell you stories about my child. So that's one of the best things that anybody who doesn't know how to help someone who's grieving is to say, tell me about your child. Yes. So that's like music to our ears, isn't it? It's very, very, very important.
Yeah, and
very healing.
Yeah, and also it's like, well, if people say, well, if you knew that was going to happen to your child, would you still have wanted to have that child? I would say 100%. More than 100%, that if Ryan only was going to be able to live 6 years and that's all he lived, guess what? I would go through those 6 years again, and 3 years of that were intense treatment for cancer, but I still would choose to do that because of the kid he was, the mischievousness, the fun, the laughter, everything about him. So it's like, yeah, is it painful that he didn't live past 6 years? Yeah, very much so, but I would not trade those 6 years. You could not give me enough money to say, well, I wish this child had never existed. Never, ever would that be the case. I'm so glad he was born, he lived, and he still lives. So, so I find that very encouraging. Yeah.
Yes. So, Debbie, can you, if you have anything else to add, you just mentioned gratitude, and that's something that I know I try to focus on that because like you all just said, I had Jameson for 9.5 absolutely amazing years, and the memory he gave me, yes, I wouldn't trade them. Debbie, are you able to tell everybody listening who's, again, fresh on this journey again, any tips of how they can find that attitude of gratitude during the deepest, darkest, freshest moments of their grief when it's so easy to focus on the fact that they're gone?
I'm going to share with you an example that a friend of ours, her husband died in 2020. Is that right? 2020. And it wasn't COVID, but it was still horrific for her. And she said, and I just love this idea so much. She said that she was just praying, how can I survive this? How can I get through my grief? And she said she got the sense to start every day, take a Post-it and write one thing that she was grateful for. And so she just began to post them on the wall. And at the end of the year, she had 365 daily things that she was grateful for. I mean, it could have been something as simple as a neighbor dropped by to bring her a cup of coffee, or that it's been raining but today is sunny. That those simple things. And because her husband, the last year of his life was really difficult for him, for her, because she was more of a caretaker than a wife. She just started writing once a week something that she loved about her husband trying to remember him as he was before he became so sick, and the negative part of grieving. And so she had 52 of those. And she said this year she's just basically going to go through these 365 daily things and just really just spend more time thanking the Lord for thanking God for these daily things of gratitude. So I think that would be something that we could all agree on, is that it's so easy to be negative and think about, oh, woe is me, and why, God, why? And so instead of just thinking, well, just maybe one good thing that you can remember about your child. And some of us, well, for us, because our child was terminal, those last few days were pretty bad memories. And I remember my Dennis's stepfather told me, he said, in the beginning, those bad memories just consume you. And he said, but those memories will fade, and then you'll be able to remember the happy times, the happy moments that you had with Ryan. And, he was so right on that. And just to think about what you're thankful for your child. And it may be the same thing over and over again, but whatever is going to help you get to the next second, to the next minute, to the next hour in the beginning. And it's just, what can you be grateful for? You will always find something to be grateful for.
And I would add too, and Debbie may mention this later about something she's writing, but also do not torment yourself with regrets. We all have things.
That's lie number one, by the way.
We all have things with our children that we wish we had done differently. I mean, and I think of some of the things with Ryan, and you think, well, but I didn't. And once the event and the death has occurred, you can't go back and undo those things. But you also can't allow yourself to be tormented, because you were a wonderful parent. How much you loved your child. And so you don't go back and try to say, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. We all have shouldas and wouldas and couldas, but guess what? That's not the way it happens. We did the best we could under the circumstances that we were living through. We did not choose to have our child die. We didn't, particularly if they had a terminal illness or they were sick, we would have never chosen that. And we did everything we could. So you have to begin to give yourself some grace that you did the very best you could as a parent, and there's nothing you could do to change it. If it was, we all would have changed it. So just a friendly reminder: don't allow regrets to do you in, because if you let regret, it will torment you and it will challenge you, and it will not be healthy.
Those are all spot on. I mean, I think Dan and I struggle with a couple of those things every day still today. And, I think that's why your guys' story is so important to us, to give us that hope that we can get to that point. Because I know, Dan and I have had these hard conversations before where you don't want to have that regret, but it just seems to pop up in that mind of yours when you least suspect it. And, kind of like, I'm not gonna say it's the same, but when with Mason, I had we had about 3 or 4 days before we knew he wasn't gonna make it. So those last days bring a lot of very difficult memories to get through. So
yes.
I definitely understand what you're saying there, Debbie. I did have a question for both of you now. As a military member, obviously your guys' story is very important to me because it feels like a mirror image, to be honest. Especially after I talked to Dennis on the phone and everything you guys did, and how I feel like our family did the exact same thing that you guys did in terms of the humanitarian move and just some of the stuff that, we've been going through in that sense. And being a military family is already difficult, and being military spouses together is extremely difficult. A lot of people don't realize the difficulties in the background that are playing out with a lot of our military members. And so how did you guys get through with your marriage? I'm sure there were some difficult moments when Ryan passed that put that extra strain on top of the military requirements that you guys had. Dennis, with your job and everything, and maybe TDYs or deployments or anything like that. Debbie, how did you get through it? Just, what kind of advice can you guys share for, and I know I'm talking about military families, but the connection you two have as a married couple can go. The lessons you have can go for all types of married couples.
Well, I think personally, I think that when you're married to a military person, I really think that the spouse should just automatically, they should be given a title or given a special gift or something to be super strong.
Amen.
And for me, I just knew that. But then again, it's with personalities, Chris. My personality is that I'm a can-do-it. I'm positive, and if there's and Dennis is the opposite. He's melancholy and he's gloomy, and he's Eeyore, and I'm the Tigger.
Right. I'm definitely Eeyore, and she's definitely Tigger.
Yeah. I just remember in the beginning feeling like, oh my goodness, I have to be the strong one here. Dennis had to go back to work, and he would come home and just be a mess. And then knowing that we had a child, it's like, okay, I need to be strong for our son. And in fact, I was writing about that in the book I'm writing, and it's that I was given the persona that, I am strong, and I have to be strong for everybody else, but not allowing myself to grieve. And I think what I ended up doing was grieving during the day when our son was in school and Dennis was at work. And so I was able to have that outlet. And because there was a group of us parents whose children were being treated at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., cancer. And all the kids had cancer, and it was a big open room, and they were all the kids were getting chemo. So we automatically had a support group right there. And so as those kids began to die one by one, and Ryan, I still remember this, he would say, well, Chris is, and there was someone by the name of Chris, he was a teenager, and they were all different types of cancer. And he said, well, Chris is dead, he's died, and then it's going to be, and he went through and he named the kids that were going to die, and he said, then it's going to be me. And we were like, no, don't say that. And you know what? It happened just the way he said. I mean, these kids are kids that have gone to heaven early. We just kind of know they have a sense of their impending death, I think, and they may ask questions, and they may try to consult the parents before then, because they don't talk like that. But I had a ready-made support group in the other moms of these whose kids died of cancer, and so we would call each other, we would meet, and so I'm very thankful for that. Am I rambling? And so, but as far as just feeling, and I know that was wrong of me, just feeling that I had to be the strong one, and I would just encourage everyone, don't do that. That is because first of all, people are thinking, boy, she's not hurting as bad as I am. Well, that's a lie, because I was just hiding it. And I think it's important to let grief have its work. And as I've been writing this book on lies grief tells you, I've been reading, because grief is messy. And one thing I've learned is that grief is different for everybody. And speaking to you dads, one thing that we noticed is that you notice that people will ask your wives, well, how after your child died, how's your wife doing? Do they ever ask you how you're doing? Because I think it's a misconception, it's a lie too, that people think that men just don't grieve, that they just deal with it, that they're strong, that they're masculine. They just must process grief totally different than women. That women are the more tender ones, the more soft ones, the more gentle ones, and that we really need attention, whereas you men don't. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's got some truth to it.
I mean, the same thing that when your kids go to college, everybody asks mom, how you doing with your child going away to college? It's pretty painful, but nobody thought to ask the dads. The dads are going through a hard time too when the kids go to college. So I think it's just a stereotypical response, I think, to those who are grieving, that men grieve just as much as women do, and that just getting over the stereotype that it's okay to allow your emotions, to allow yourself to grieve.
No, that makes perfect sense. That's really why Dan and I started this, was because we noticed in a lot of the dad grief, social media pages, it was pretty much like crickets. Almost no one was talking. It was just lots of people in the groups, but no one saying anything. And Dan and I thought, you know what, this might be an opportunity to help us get through our grief and maybe help some others. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a very important point that a lot of people do miss, for sure.
Yeah. And also tied in with the military has some fairly high expectations for the people that are in the military. I mean, I was a nurse. I was expected to be back at work in 2 weeks after my son had died, taking care of very sick patients. Believe me, to this day, I don't know how I did that. It was only by taking it 1 minute at a time, because I was a basket case. But being in the military, you've got to step up to the plate. You've got to do the job, and you just have to do it. And so I would say, give yourself grace. Again, if you want to, what you want to do sometimes is just go in a hole somewhere and just dig a hole and just stay there. But life doesn't work that way, and particularly in any kind of job, but particularly when you're in the military. And so I worked through, I would say, some real like unforgiveness towards people that were bosses of mine, because their expectations would be so high, and I'm not ready to be able to do that, but you still had to do it. So I had to process some, you're expecting too much of me, and but fortunately I took care of patients. I didn't kill anybody that I know of, and I don't think I did, and I didn't. But I just say, you just have to be aware that you do what you can do, and that's the best you can do. And then you go home, and then you've got your family who you really can't deal with right now. So grief is just, it's a bit much, to say the very least.
And I will say one last thing with that, before I get off my soapbox with that, is it's still the same, Dennis. There's still no bereavement leave in the military. I had to burn all my leave before, and I haven't been able to dig out of the hole yet. It's been 2 years now, and it is something I've been working with some higher up people. I've brought it up. I've talked to some people and trying to work it, but same thing. As soon as I did that humanitarian move, because they didn't know me, they're like, get to work. What are you doing? And I'm like, I can't even think right now. What do you mean get to work? So it was definitely a difficult transition that I regret.
And not only for the military, but for people in general. People can be very, very supportive when you're going through the throes of the immediacy of the situation. But they somehow, when 2 weeks pass or 3 weeks pass, you're not back to normal. You're not dealing with this, or they don't want to talk. They don't. You're not over it, right? They don't mention the name. They don't ask anything, and so you just. I think a lot of grief is you somehow have to be supportive of other people, because some people are just totally ignorant. I mean, they're not choosing to be ignorant. They just don't know what to do with you, and if they haven't experienced that depth of grief, they don't know how to say. You mean it's been 6 months and you're still just crying constantly about your child? People don't know that. And so for me, it's a lot of this is educational. And if we don't, as bereaved parents, if we don't educate other people about what we need and how grief is, they're never going to know, because they haven't experienced this. So they think, life just goes on. No, life does not just go on.
Absolutely.
And Chris, I just want to say that about being in the military, Ryan was in the first grade when he died, and I was a volunteer in his classroom, and I just felt that I wanted to finish the school year out for him, because he couldn't. So I can oh my God, it was so hard. But I kept volunteering in his classroom, and some of his little classmates would come to me and say, I remember Ryan, and then they would tell me stories about him, and it was just so touching. But I tell you, the hardest thing is when I would go to school to pick up Chad, and he was in fourth grade, right? In fourth grade. Only one child came out of the school building, not two. I remember that was really hard. It was very, very hard. Very hard. And the name, and like that, we were lived in a cul-de-sac on the base, and it was just a lot of awkwardness. I mean, people just, they didn't know what to do. They were really sad, but they just didn't know what to do. They didn't want to say anything because who knows, they just didn't know what to do. So I think that's the uncomfortableness, and probably still is today, that people just don't know what to do or say to someone who's grieving, which.
Yep, I would say that, Dan, I think we've had a couple episodes on that, right? If I remember correctly, on this is exactly what you can say. So, Dan, I'm gonna throw it your way for some of your questions.
Debbie, you just hit me hard with the unfinished business thing. And again, that's why I hope so many people listen to this, because you two have so much wisdom that you can share. The fact what you just shared about finishing the school year out as a volunteer in Ryan's classroom, I think is enormous. I
have another story.
Please.
I always have wanted to go, no matter where we were living in the military, I'd always have wanted to go to the high school graduation that he would have graduated high school. And we knew that was kind of iffy because, they always have to send out invitations, and nowadays they only have a certain amount they can send out. But we happened to be living in Aviano, Italy. Mm-hmm. And someone from our church was graduating high school, and they gave us the invitation, would you like to come to the graduation? And we said, sure, but we didn't tell them because we didn't really want to see them. We were just wanting as another memorial stone, a milestone. Mm-hmm. And, it was Dennis and I kept talking about it, and it's like, this is the weirdest thing. We went to the graduation, and I was doing pretty good until the graduates, Bette Midler's song, The Rose, the graduates took a rose to the mom. Mm. This mom didn't get a rose. And so that was like, oh, why did I want to do this? But, I just felt, for me, it was really important to do that. So those milestones, even though it's painful, like today, it was bittersweet, but, Ryan lived, and it's important that we parents just remember that our child lived, and that we are the only ones that can tell their story.
And also know that as you've had a child that dies, all of your life, there are going to be milestone events in your life with your other children and other people that your child's not going to be there. But you do those events, and instead of just getting all down about it, but like our son getting married, our first grandchild being born, all this kind of things, that there won't be an Uncle Ryan because he didn't live to be an Uncle Ryan.
He would have been such a fun.
Yeah, and he was so mischievous. He would have been a hilarious uncle. But you still don't stop living life because that child's no longer there. You have that pain, that hurt, that they are not there, but you still live life, and you will live life with joy again. And that's what, for people early on in grief, they don't see how that can be possible. It's very possible. Yeah, there'll still be times when it'll stab you right in, and you'll think, oh my goodness, I can't deal with this. But like going to the graduation, Chad getting married, grandchildren being born, all those special things that Ryan will never do, guess what? You remember, but you still keep going, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Again, you hit me hard with that, because I admire you for taking care of unfinished business. We lost Jameson in February, so we had all his Christmas presents laying around the house, and one of his main gifts that year was a 5x5 Rubik's Cube, and he had played with it just a little bit, and it sat there for, I think it was almost a year. We just couldn't touch his bedroom, and then finally I'm like, I've got to finish the stupid thing, and it's a stupid little piece of plastic, but it was an absolutely enormous thing that I had to do it. So I pulled up the YouTube videos and I got it done. And it's sitting upstairs in our little memorial shelves for him. And both Erica and I had books that she was reading one with Jameson, and then the one that he was reading by himself were laying there, and we had to finish those books. You just, it's a major part of that healing. That, yes, it's hard. It's really hard, and there are tears every step of the way.
Yeah.
But and Dennis, you use the word joy, and as a Christian, I mean, any Christian knows about joy, the joy in the Lord, and I struggle with that. And every song that comes on the radio, joy will come in the morning and all that, I'm like, I'm not joyful in the morning still. I'm not there yet. But as you said that, those were the moments that I had joy since losing Jameson. When I was, as hard as they were, when I was able to finish that Rubik's Cube. Yeah, that's that. I can think back now that you said it, that was a joyful moment, and it was a moment. But it was a moment. And I think it was enormous to my taking a few steps closer to healing.
And that's what healing is. It's going to be a few steps forward, and then guess what? A number of steps backwards. Eventually, you have more forward steps than you do backward steps. But you don't put the pressure on yourself. There's not a time limit. It's not by this point you should be this way. By this point you should. That's a bunch of bull. By this point you should be exactly where you are, progressing at the pace that you're progressing, and go with that. Grief is not a time to put unrealistic expectations on yourself. Enough people put unrealistic expectations upon the grieving people. You certainly don't need to put them on yourself.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, one of the things Dan and I did see on some of the regular grief groups, not just the dad grief groups, is sometimes there's these people going through grief that they could be like 15 or 20 years in. Dan and I talk about these people pretty often, how they still say they can't even get out of bed in the morning most days. And what kind of advice would you throw them, if anyone's listening, that they're still struggling that hard just to get through their day-to-day routine?
I would say, as I look at grief, and I did some of that, I really went way deep sometimes. I think there's grief and there's sorrow. And I think grief is very natural and very normal. I think when sorrow becomes so deep that you cannot get out of it, I think it's become very not healthy, non-therapeutic. And if you still can't get out of bed 15 to 20 years later, I would hardly suggest you find a good therapist, find someone, a grief counselor that's really trained in grief, because what happens is, I think for me, what really helped me was that I went through some long years of grief. I mean, long, deep depression. I still functioned, got promoted, all those kind of things. But I think for me, I finally began to realize my son would never want me to live my life the way I was living it, with such deep sorrow. And so I think that if the person that's experiencing that deep sorrow, if they could, one, if you have the joy and the hope of the resurrection, I can't grieve for Ryan, as far as Ryan has got the best life of any of us people. I mean, come on. If Ryan's in heaven, so guess what? It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, it doesn't. So for me, I think it's just looking at the deep sorrow and recognizing, I think I came to realize my son would not want me to live my life that way. He would not want me to live my life in the depths of deep despair and sorrow because he died. He would say, Dad, get going. Keep going. Live your life to the full. I believe is what he would tell me. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer what you said?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Dan and I felt the same way about that, but always great to get your guys, expertise on that for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of chuckling here because we brought you on here to talk about two very specific things, and we haven't even talked about them yet because of all the wisdom and advice you have. So with your permission, if you all have enough time, I'd love to wrap up this episode and have you back on for another episode. Do you all have time to stick around a little bit, and we'll make this a part 1, part 2 series over a couple weeks?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Great. So yeah, for everybody listening, Dennis and Debbie, we're not going anywhere. We know that your time to listen is precious. So we're gonna wrap up this episode, but we're gonna come right back. We're not going anywhere. So with that, as always, we want to thank you for listening to A Father's Love, Healing Through Heartache. As always, you can reach out to Chris and myself on our Facebook pages, on our emails and websites. And we hope that you will come back in what'll be a week for your time, but just minutes for ours. And join us again for another episode of A Father's Love, Healing Through Heartache.